David Pepper's on the line with us, the lawyer, writer. His latest book is Saving Democracy, a user's manual for every American. Political activist, former elected official, adjunct professor at the University of Cincinnati College of Law, has served as the chair of the Ohio Democratic Party and regularly writes on Substack, laboratories-of-autocracy.com. Go to Substack and plug in David Pepper. I just wanted to get that straight. So, because I subscribe to it, in fact, I'm holding a copy of your most recent newsletter here in my hand that I marked up this morning. You write, over the past year, we've seen a case study of this with the takeover of the Ohio School Board, an independent body with numerous members elected directly by voters. So, number one, how did and why did Ohio get an independent school board? And number two, what are the Republicans trying to do about that and why?
So my bigger theory, and I assume you'll agree with this, is that public education is clearly one of the major fronts in their attack on democracy. They don't like public education for many reasons. And Ohioans, to their credit, in the 50s, had a constitutional amendment to create some independence in the way our public schools were dealt with because they were concerned about politicians and their donors sort of using schools for their benefit and not the benefit of families and kids. So we've had an independently elected school board for the state. We've had an independent superintendent. And just like so much else in America, last year, we actually elected some public school champions to these positions against the culture war type of figures that we're all stuck with. So the voters spoke out. They wanted sort of normal public school advocates on the school board. And within weeks of that, our governor, our state house, basically another form of election denialism, passed a law stripping almost all the powers away from the elected school board and bringing it into the governor's bureaucracy. And so if you look back over the last 20 years in Ohio, we've had scandal after scandal as they've given public school dollars away to for-profit online schools. They're now giving it away to these private vouchers that are subsidizing middle-class families who are already going to private schools with public funds. By doing this, they not only get it out of the hands of the voters directly voting for these members, they're putting all of this stuff with a history of really scandal behind closed doors where we can't see it. And so I walked through over the last year just how aggressive they have been in trying to remove the oversight of public schools from the public eye and really from being directly controlled by the voters. It's really disturbing.
It really is. Is this being motivated by ideology? You know, we hate public schools. Which seems a bizarre thing for Republicans to embrace, but I get it. Jefferson famously said, if you want an uneducated populace and a functioning democracy, you want something that never existed and never will. Bad paraphrase, but so is it ideology? They hate public schools. Is it, does this track back to the 1954 Brown decision? Is it because public schools are racially integrated? Or is it just good old-fashioned corruption? The very profitable private schools are shoveling campaign funds and support to Republican politicians, and in exchange for that, they're messing with the law. What's going on here, David?
I think that, so this is basically happening in so many of these red states, and I think the answer is it's because all these things are aligning. Corruption, pay to play. The biggest donor to the Ohio Republican Party for a number of years was a for-profit online school scam that pulled money out of public schools for every student it claimed was taking courses online, and it converted some of those public dollars into contributions to politicians. So there's pay-to-play corruption. By the way, that outfit was taken down by the FBI in the end. It was a massive scam. Corruption, ideology, far-right religious groups, and just the broader effort to undermine public schools because of unions, because of the broader common good approach they bring. So it's all those things come together, and that's why I think what you see, and when those things align, that's when you truly see the right wing go nuts. And right now, there's money to be made from these public dollars. It's like a piggy bank for their donors. There's an ideology they're supporting. And again, I bring up the Ohio example, but all around the country, in 23, we saw an explosion of these universal vouchers, which are, as we can see in the data in states like Arizona, Ohio, are largely now paying for private schools for families who already could afford those private schools. Right. It's not the old narrative, oh, this is helping kids in public schools who can't afford. No, this is actually going to subsidize families who are already going to private schools. So This is a real national crisis right now. It's getting overlooked, I'm afraid, which is why I'm trying to highlight it. And this public school board takeover in Ohio is especially an egregious example of it. It's going to all get behind closed doors. It already is, frankly.
It's an upper middle class subsidy, in fact.
Totally.
So how are the good citizens of Ohio reacting to this? I mean, there have been this series of just outrages, and the most visible, at least nationally, was the one around, trying to raise the threshold for a constitutional amendment for the abortion issue, from 50 to 60%. At what point do the citizens of Ohio look around and go, these people are screwing with us?
What's interesting is this also this cuts against sort of the conservative rhetoric that schools should be determined by the parents and the voters and not put in a bureaucracy. It's the Republicans in Ohio who took the decision away from voters and stuck it into a bureaucracy. So I did a poll on this about 4 months ago. And to your question about what should we do, this issue was toxic. Trump voters hated this idea. Democrats hated this idea. Supporters of the governor hated this idea. This thing was less popular than any idea. It was like 75% disagreed, 15% agreed. Wow. They want to vote directly for their state school board. So my advice, I think this is what happens in these states. They're just hoping it goes away. And the reason I wrote this was to say to everybody, do not let it go away because it's toxic. This is a terrible issue for them. It's worse than an abortion ban, which is already terrible. This is a bad issue for them. It's a third rail. So every state house candidate, every statewide candidate, every sort of community meeting, we need to keep this on the front burner because in the end, I actually think this could be a very big issue going into future statewide elections. It's as you said, it's sort of a combination of people wanting to vote for schools and that issue one last year in Ohio that was basically taking their vote away. This is like issue one for schools. Right. And there are a few issues left that people really don't want the extremists to take over. And we saw this with all the Moms of Liberty people losing all over the country last November. They don't want extremism in their schools. They want to vote for the most part. And this is sort of an end run at cutting the voters out from school decisions to get a more extreme approach in Ohio. In most places, they do not want that. And I think there's a way to take this and turn it into a very sort of high-profile, high-energy campaign issue for the future.
Now, in 1980, when David Koch was pouring money into the Libertarian Party and basically kind of revived and built the Libertarian Party, he ran for vice president that year on the Libertarian ticket. And one piece of his platform was to break the bond between school and state. He wanted to do away with all compulsory school attendance laws. He wanted to do away with all federal, state, and even local support for, there was taxpayer-based support for education. He wanted to close all the public schools and basically say, you're on your own. Figure out a way to educate your kid. And if you can't do that, you shouldn't, or whatever. That's been a libertarian ideology for a long time. And in 1980, when David Koch ran on that, people thought he was a crackpot. But now you've got, 5 states that have universal vouchers, as I recall? Maybe 3? And
expanding, 23 it exploded. I mean, one of the experts who's against this called 23 the year of the universal voucher.
Exactly.
And, by the way, it does go back to what you're saying, though. This is DeVos. This is a lot of them. They really don't want government in schools. They think of it as sort of a market economy. Each person should choose. They would crush public schools. They can't really admit that. So at first it was a voucher for poor kids in public schools, a small sliver. Then they universalized it. So largely it's white middle-class families grabbing at money that they most of all didn't even need to go to schools they were already going to. It's blowing up. And of course, if that money's being given out, and by the way, we have letters that we found and others have found. Schools now send letters to parents saying, here's this new opportunity. Be sure to grab it. And some schools have said, you must grab it or we want to have a meeting with you or we'll take away your support. And so we're seeing the numbers just explode, going up to $1 billion. Arizona exploding in costs, exploding in numbers. And that all, and by the way, and then on the flip side, this nonstop narrative to run down public schools, right? The indoctrination. So run down the public, big money and subsidy for the private. it is serving that goal that the Kochs and DeVos have, which is in the end to kind of crush the system of public education. So, and I worry that it's still getting lost how bad these universal vouchers really are for systems like Ohio's. By the way, one other thing, we were the 5th highest ranked school system in quality in the nation 15 years ago, Ohio. We're now in the mid-20s. So the result of all this nonsense and the pay to play is a school system that was one of the best is falling rapidly. So there's a real impact on all this stuff on the ultimate quality of the education being provided.
We're talking to David Pepper. David, I had just a little less than a minute here before we hit a hard break I can't control. Is there any kind of a movement in Ohio to push back on this, or in any of the other states that have embraced, statewide vouchers?
Yeah, there are multiple lawsuits right now. One, a lot of public school boards, to their credit, have signed on to a lawsuit saying that this violates a part of our Constitution that says that we have to provide a certain level of common schools, public schools. There's another lawsuit that some parents are bringing against the state school board takeover. In a state like Ohio, these are somewhat uphill battles, but I'm really glad they're bringing them. It also brings attention to it. There are also some really good public advocates, and I cite them often in my Substacks, folks who have been at this for years, who I really admire, who really make sure this doesn't get lost. And in the end, as I said, we're all on the side of about 75% of Ohioans. This is only happening because of gerrymandered districts that they can't sort of lose from, because for the most part, people still like their local public school.
Yeah.
And if they understand that it's being undermined, they will lose an election in a fair district. So we've got to keep it on the front burner. There's some wonderful people who are doing that every single day, still now after years in this fight.
So go over to Substack.com and plug in David Pepper, and subscribe to his newsletter. It's really worth reading. David, thank you so much.
Thanks again. Appreciate the uplift.
My pleasure.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
18 minutes past the hour. Now Republicans are saying out loud that they don't want non-Christians in government. Seriously? I'll tell you about that in just a moment. Stay with us.